Now in this video, let's see what's this prototype in action and how we could use that. I've just opened up, as you see, my website, easytocatch.com. And in order to just have a simple editor to type our JavaScript code and show my ideas, as you know, I'm inside Google Chrome at the time, so I could press Ctrl-Shift-I, and then I have a simple editor to be used for JavaScripting. The first code snippet I'd like to show you is just this simple snippet which has defined a variable s1 of type var, and it has been assigned some value. The first thing which might seem interesting to you as a programmer migrating from Java or C# is that this s1, it has been defined just as a var. It's like a dynamic type, and it's one of those great features you could have in a dynamic programming language like JavaScript. So when you continue your program, it could be just different values which could be assigned to s1 with different types. It doesn't need to be just one type. The other thing is that I've assigned something enclosed by these curly brackets to s1, and one of the things that you might find similar to what you had in Java or C# is that every statement terminates with a semicolon. Now, what I have inside these curly brackets is basically a format used natively inside JavaScript. What you might find interesting is that it's not like assignments as we have in other programming languages. It's mostly like properties and their values, like std_id or student ID is going to have the value of 1001. Or student name is going to have my name as Reza. And as you see, all these things have been separated by commas. And at the end, we have defined a function named print. So we have defined print colon is going to be a function which takes no argument, and the body of the function acts like this. Now, what we're doing here in the body of this function is that we're going to be printing these things inside console.log, which is basically the same console as you see in here. And it's going to be printing this, the std_id, it means the student ID for this object, and then a blank space followed by the student name of this student object. As you see, it's a very concise format showing very simply what do we have inside our object. We have student ID, we have student name, and we have print as a function, and each one of them has been separated by their value with a colon. The other thing, again, as you see in here, we don't have to mention even the types of the items. We just name them and then give them the value, and throughout the program their value could be changed, or even their type could be changed, because again JavaScript is weakly typed programming language. It's not a strongly typed language like Java or C#. There could also be other ways to define an object. We just try to use the simplest. So it gets interesting when I press enter and then I type s1. It's basically I'm asking s1 from the console, and then it gives me this value object, which is going to have std_id at the value 1001, name with the value of Reza as a literal string or a constant string enclosed in double quotations, and then we'll have print as an f, which basically means it's a function. So now if you expand this one, it's giving you more details. Again, we have a print as a function, we have sname, we have std_id. What is this? Underline, underline, proto, underline, underline, strange name, new entity. It's like we know what is print, what is sname, what is std_id. These have been explicitly defined in our defining variable s1. But now we have double underline proto, double underline, which says I'm going to be an object. This one is basically the same thing as we call prototype so far. And it's basically pointing to the prototype for this object. For now, we don't have to go into the details of what's going to be inside this object. There are many things inside this one. What you need to know for now is that this one is an object.prototype. It's basically the prototype of any default object. The other thing which you might find again interesting is that we have used this the same way we have used this in other object-oriented programming languages. For example, in this function print, I've asked this function to print this.std_id. It means print the student ID for this object. So this basically refers to the current object, or the object which we are doing some action on that at this time. So now if we come to the console and then ask the console to do this one for me, so let's say s1, and then we call the print as a method. It's basically running the body of the function. It says the student ID is 1001, then space, then the name is Reza. So for now, what we know is that whatever object you define is going to have some prototype. And if you don't mention the prototype, as you're seeing here, by default, it would be the object with capital O dot prototype. And that object with capital O is like the base object. All the objects in JavaScript are going to be inheriting from that one. But they're inheriting not from the class object. Again, they're inheriting from the object with capital O, which is something like the parent of all the objects in JavaScript. Now, let's define another variable, this time s2. And this time is much more simpler. It just has one variable. It's basically a property, SF name or a student family name, and the value would be my last name, which is Kojeste. Now again, this time if I run this and ask the console what is S2, it's giving me this underline, underline, proto underline, underline. And again, I expand this one, again the same thing I had before. It's basically object.prototype. Again, this is like this S2 has inherited everything from the object. And the fact is that there is not that much inside the object. Now, this time, let's define for a second time the variable s2 this way, as you've seen here, in a different way compared to the way we had defined it before. And again, it's one of the features of the JavaScript as a dynamic programming language. And as you know, that's not something that we could have, at least by default, in programming languages like Java or C#. But the main important point in here is that this time I said that this is going to have some family name and explicitly have defined prototype. So I've mentioned underline, underline, proto, underline, underline is going to have the value of s1. As opposed to the first time, I don't leave it to have the object.prototype as default. I'm explicitly telling that this s1 should be used as the prototype object for s2. If I run it and then ask for s2 again, I expand this one. I have the family name with Kojeste. Now I have underline, underline, proto, underline, underline, which is an object. In the beginning, it seems to be exactly like before. But if I expand this one, now this time, it seems to be the prototype of this s2 is going to be referring to whatever we had inside s1. Now this time I have a function named print. This time I have student name. And this time I have student ID. And I have a nested prototype, which now, if I expand this one, as you see, it's going to be the same as we had before. So as you see in here, it's like every object in JavaScript points to its prototype. So in this case, I have s2, which points to its prototype from s1. And then the same s1 has a prototype which points to the object.prototype, which is basically the end of this prototype chain in here. We could say s2 has inherited something from s1, but it's better to say that s2 as an object has inherited something from the s1's prototype. So I would have the option not only to say, let's say s2.sfname, which gives me the last name, but I also have the option to say s2. Let's say stdid, and this time, this one, s2.stdid, and this time this gives me 1001, and this has been inherited into this object from the prototype of s1, explicitly defined to be the prototype for this s2. As the last point I want to mention here, and then we put the remaining for the next video, is that if we define another variable s3 in this case, and then we define it as an object which has the property semester with the value of 1, and then we say explicitly that the prototype for this s3 should be s2. Now if I run this one, and then I ask for s3, as you see in here, s3 is going to have something like semester, because it's been explicitly defined in that object, and then it has a prototype which is basically referring to s2, because s2 had family name, and then a nested prototype which is now pointing to s1, because s1 had print function, sname, and stdid, and then a prototype, again nested, which now this time is going to be pointing to the final point in this chain, which is basically object.prototype. And then we're going to talk about this prototype chain in the next video with more details.